This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 764, recorded January 3rd, 2024. You have to be pretty cynical. This week, Kathrine Drickman joins me. We talk with Vasquez about AlmaLinux, how to make sure an open source project can last the test of time, why contributions really are more than just code, and why a dose of cynicism might help with both. Oh, and why her name is never capitalized. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. Hey, hello, welcome. It is FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and of course, it's not just me. We have the wonderful Kathrine Drickman, Miss Kathrine of the Linux journals, where I first sort of heard about her, and then
the olden days of the Linux journal.
A lot of work on Drupal through the years, has been podcasting for a while with Doc over on Reality 2.0, and it's now of Intel. Welcome, Kathrine.
Thank you. This is different. A whole new FLOSS Weekly.
It is. It's sort of like buying a new car, and for the first couple of days that you sit in, it's just everything is a little different. You got to get used to it. That's kind of the way I feel about being over here at Hackaday. But it is
figure out the buttons.
Yes.
What does this button do?
Yes. Figure out the buttons, because we don't have somebody other than me doing the technical stuff. But that's all right. So we have Vasquez today, and Benny, of course, of AlmaLinux fame. Kathrine, what do you know about Benny, or about certainly about AlmaLinux, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like everybody else, I followed the creation and a little bit of the evolution of Alma, because, the community interest, right? It's it's an interesting story. I mean, we can get into, I don't want to talk about it too much, but yeah, I know a little, but I don't know a lot. And so I'm anxious to hear more.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and bring Benny on. Hey, welcome. I think we may have both hit the mute button at the same time there. Welcome.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
It is great to have you. So give us the 30,000-foot view. We sort of teasingly say that everybody knows what AlmaLinux is, but maybe someone has been hiding under a rock for the last year and a half. What is AlmaLinux? What's the short story here?
It's funny you put it like that, because there was a conference that I went to last year. It was DockerCon, and DockerCon was kind of a late edition for us, and we weren't really sure that it was going to be worthwhile. And the number one question that I got at the booth was, what is Red Hat?
Oh.
So, what?
there's certainly people out there that don't know what we are and don't know why it matters. So it's been an interesting year.
I mean, I can understand if you were talking to, I say this gently, normal people, normies. Doc used to call them muggles. But at a place like DockerCon, that's really surprising.
Yeah, I think just the people there were so abstracted from the operating system, they had no reason really to care. So like Linux is all they care about, and then I do whatever I need to do. So it was definitely, how do I say, humbling.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So to answer your question, AlmaLinux is an enterprise Linux operating system that is now based on, I guess not based on. We maintain compatibility with Red Hat Enterprise Linux and pull our updates from the CentOS Stream repositories. We match releases with Red Hat, and so you'll see releases from us twice a year, and like the numbers match with Red Hat and that kind of stuff to make it easy for our users. But I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. We used to be based completely on Red Hat, and then this year, in 2023, had to shift from being based on Red Hat's code to CentOS Stream.
Yes, there's a lot.
There's the story.
Yeah. Well, that's not the only story. That's kind of the controversial one, though.
Yeah.
So, let's see. Which direction do we want to go with this? AlmaLinux is not the only Red Hat repackage. What does the rest of the landscape out there look like, and why is Alma the best?
So if we, I guess we didn't even really talk about why AlmaLinux started, did we? Or did I?
Not yet.
We can go there first.
Yeah, let's go there first. So we got started because in December of 2021, or maybe 2020, it was 2020, Red Hat announced that they would no longer be providing the downstream CentOS version that so much of the world had started to had been relying on for a very long time.
Yes.
And as users of CentOS, we still wanted it to exist, so we started creating it. And yes, and like you said, we are not the only ones. We are joined by folks from CIQ that run Rocky Linux. Oracle has a version. SUSE has a version. There are a number of other what were like CentOS repacks that are choosing a new upstream as well. And those are all either specialized or just somebody, scratching an itch like people do in Linux land. And so there's a lot of Red Hat options or Red Hat equivalent options in the world today.
Yes. Last couple of weeks, we actually had another guest on the show here, Neil Gampa, who was a Red Hatter, and actually had some really interesting tidbits to share about that time at Red Hat. And a lot of us thought, well, this is because IBM bought Red Hat is why they are making all of these changes. And Neil told us, he's like, people at IBM were ticked that Red Hat did this.
Yep.
Really? No, I don't know so little of this story. I feel like I have been under a rock.
Pieces of it have been kind of whispering out on the breeze over the last few years. Okay, and then what happened about a year ago? Something else changed, right? Because we went from just being a repack of the Red Hat sources, so a bug for bug compatible clone. Not to use that word derogatorily, like some might, but it's fairly accurate, clone of Red Hat to now something a little different.
Yeah, so it was actually in June that they announced that Red Hat would no longer be shipping the rel sources to git.centos.org like they always had. So it was, if you look at the blog posts, what they said was they weren't seeing interaction from their community. They wanted more engagement. And then because they weren't getting the engagement they wanted, they opted to shift where they were putting things and how they were supporting the downstream community.
Right.
And yeah, that meant that we shifted from, it completely broke our build pipeline, right?
Right.
And the good news is that we have a bunch of incredibly smart, incredibly experienced folks in our community that are doing the building, and they started looking at what Red Hat wanted us to do, which was start using CentOS Stream as our upstream. And they were like, with the exception of a few things that that Red Hat admitted was an omission, we could do what they wanted to do. So that's what we did. We shifted and started using CentOS Stream for our source, mostly CentOS Stream. We also pull from upstream, or like as a very last resort, we'll use UBI images. But we've got a solid pipeline now that doesn't rely on anything that we would not be proud of.
What is a UBI image?
Universal base image. It's a thing that Red Hat puts out that also includes sources.
Oh, okay.
So you can pull source code from there if you are trying to get around their user agreement.
Got it. Little bit of lingo that I wasn't aware of.
No problem.
That user agreement. I don't know if you want to get into this because we tread onto legal grounds here, but
no, yeah, we can talk about it briefly.
That has always seemed like a violation of the GPL to me. Do you have any thoughts on that you're willing to share?
Sure, yeah. It's really hard to tell. So
that's true.
I am not a lawyer, right? So, and until recently, we didn't have a lawyer on our board. So we looked at it, and we did have a couple of consultations with legal teams, right? People that are, frankly, that our sponsors let us borrow.
Sure.
But we whether or not it was a violation of GPL was not something that we were going to be able to fight.
Right.
We're a nonprofit foundation that is supported by, we have 25 sponsors, but those 25 sponsors are not ready to go to, go to the mat with Red Hat in a legal battle. So that's why we chose the direction we chose. Whether or not it's a violation of GPL depends on how you interpret. You must share source code with your users.
Right. Well, there's also the clause about not adding any additional restrictions. That's the one that always seemed questionable to me.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's going to be an interesting few years as the industry itself decides whether or not they're going to fight Red Hat on it. There's some pretty
yes.
deep pockets that might go to bet.
Yes. That's so. I have to give a tip of the hat to Simon Phipps for coming up with this phrase. Licenses do not compile as much as we would like them to. And
that's a good one.
It is. It took me a while to figure out exactly what he meant by that, but it's actually really good. The idea is that all of these licenses to our source code, they are legal instruments, and as such, they don't really mean anything until they are tested in a court, and that is expensive. That is really expensive sometimes. So, and his continuing point that he always makes there is that's why you want a community as well as a license, so that you have a leg to stand on other than just that legal agreement. All right, let's see.
That's a good. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no. In fact, I was thinking about handing it over to Kathrine. So go ahead and pick it up.
Well, I was just thinking what you just said. Actually, it was kind of a good segue into the stuff I'm really curious about here, right? So what matters ultimately, to the sustainability of a project is the community, and I would really like to hear the story of. So I see. I see Alma as sort of a rescuer kind of situation, right? You have a community that depends on a thing. The thing is about to not exist in the previous form, and so the community comes together and makes another thing happen, right? And I'm really curious about that story and how you, in the past, it's been a little over 2 years, right?
Yeah.
How you kind of put all of those pieces together pretty quickly, because community work takes time. It can be frustratingly slow, and I would just like to hear that story of like how you've built up in the last 2 years the community that you have, and the support and the structure and all of those things.
Yeah. So, man, that's a good question. It's a long one answer.
That's fine,
because we're actually because we're in 2024 now. We're actually at almost 3 years since we lost our first version. And we so first thing, let's back up a little bit. So our initial push came from this guy named Igor Seletsky, and he is the CEO of CloudLinux and has been around in the web hosting industry for a million years, but has also just been part of the Linux community since he was a kid. Like, he loves Linux and he's been around it forever, and he's seen how things evolve. And he stepped in and said, like immediately recognized the impact that losing CentOS would have, not just on the web hosting industry, which honestly is built on CentOS, but also on the everything from science to general testing to all of the innovation and speed with which people can adapt and adopt new things. And just he immediately recognized the problem, right? And so he said, okay, we have to fix this. I've got a team, because CloudLinux, the operating system, has historically been a hardened, much more secure version of Red Hat. And that was specifically targeted early on. It was specifically targeted at web hosting. Now it does a lot more than that. But so he said, I have a team that already knows how to rebuild Red Hat. I have a build pipeline already. I have everything that I need to set this up quickly and securely. And I can bring in the people that I need to make sure that we do it right so it lasts long term. Essentially correct the problems and the concerns that we had as users of CentOS, right? So that's what he did. He started gathering the people that he needed, starting putting together the tech, and a huge part of our success was him bringing in Jacob Utball from if you know Jack, then you know that he's from basically everywhere, but he was at Red Hat for a while. He was part of Fedora very early on. And he really was our champion. His title was community manager, but he was community manager, but he's absolutely our champion and pushes us everywhere. He's stepped back a bit because he's got a day job now that is not AlmaLinux.
Oh wow.
He's doing he works at Microsoft making sure that Linux works on Azure. But he was a huge part of it, and the amount of support that we got very early on, just because we were like, listen, we know this is going to be a problem, we're going to set it up as a nonprofit, we're going to make sure that the board is people who are invested and people who really care about the future, and it'll be community managed and community elected and all that kind of stuff. It's been huge, and the way that we've gotten to see it grow has been very exciting.
And can we talk a little bit about the values of, I mean, we're probably preaching to the choir here a little bit, but the value of vendor neutrality, right?
Yeah.
And how you set things up early on in a foundation like this and an organization like this to maintain that and make sure it's sustainable and make sure it's protected.
Yeah, so you have to be pretty cynical. So there's a certain amount of like you love, you care about, you are very excited about all of the people that are coming to get engaged. But you also have to look at it and say, okay, I'm not going to be able to be here forever. How do I set this up in a way that will outlive me? Like, set it up so it can't be gamed, or it makes it really hard to be gamed, because humans are human. Like, if I step away and the person that replaces me is not as idealistic and like, I don't know what word I want to use there, but
yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, not as deeply connected to the ideology. Actually, I have a follow-up question after you're done. But go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So if the person that steps in after me isn't, as you said, deeply connected to the ideology, then there's a chance that things shift in a way that makes the whole community uncomfortable. So we had to make sure that whatever we set up did not was the least likely to fall to that, right? If you look at CentOS, the way that things went down, it was primarily because they didn't, at least initially, and still don't really there was no legal structure around it. And so for us, it was really important that that a legal structure gets set up, and that the way that we set it up, it couldn't be bought or sold. Like, that's the other thing that we really felt strongly about, was you can't buy or sell things. And that nobody on the board, you can't have more than one person from a single company on the board of AlmaLinux. So you can't have like a single company takeover sort of motion. Mm-hmm. It's that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up something early on, and you said that there's something that surprised us, which was that somebody came up to you at DockerCon and didn't know what Red Hat was. Asked you, what's Red Hat? And I think that's interesting, because I bring this up a lot in conversations that I have with people. And that is, I'm just going to put it, I'm not 25 anymore. So there are a couple of questions. And one is like the conversation about sustainability of open source communities is a big one, right? And we all depend on this stuff, and we need it to keep going. But there's also this question of things that I see as a person who's been around a little bit longer than some newer people. And that I see that, like you say, people are so abstracted from the guts. Let's just call them the guts, right? The operating system, some of it's the open source ideology, the community, the story of how we got here from wherever we were 30 years ago. And I feel like, and I wonder what impact that has. And I wonder how it changes things, maybe for the better, maybe not. I don't know. But I wonder what you observe in that area. And just that, like, what is it? How are people so abstracted? People who do work on software and work on technology in their day-to-day lives can still, be so, have a completely different perspective at the end of the day. And I wonder, like, what you're seeing.
Yes. Well, I mean, so when I got my start in early 2000s in the web hosting industry, I used CentOS as my desktop because that was what we were using on the servers.
Yeah.
I had no idea that it was a downstream clone of Red Hat. I didn't know what Red Hat was, right? Like, there was no reason for me to know what Red Hat was because I had CentOS, and that was what everyone used. And I think it's kind of like that. Like, when I got started, it was a job. It was not a passion. It was not anything I was excited about. It was, I mean, I was super excited about the paycheck. But that was about it, right? Like, the only thing so maybe it is the age thing. When I was a kid, it was a job. I was very excited to have the job. I didn't really care about the technology underneath it. Now, as I'm older, I have the privilege of being able to have those sorts of ideals where I sit there and say, these are the things that matter to me. And these are the things, and that means that I have more interest in getting involved where I want to put my energy. And when most of the people at DockerCon, I would say, were definitely under 30, shall we say. And so those folks are, they're aiming at a job. They're aiming at how can I advance my career, but they don't really see paying attention to the evolution of open source or evolution of operating systems, especially, as something that's super important. They're going to look at what they need to accomplish what they want to do, and they'll say, okay, I need an operating system that is stable. Which one do I use? And that's why the Linux subreddit there's like 4 or 5 really popular Linux subreddits, and every week there's somebody saying, what Linux should I use?
Oh, yes.
And it's the same thing, right? They just don't know. They don't know.
It's sort of the paralysis of choice. There's so many different distros out there.
Yes. Have you seen, I think you guys have seen the giant, like, spider web of
the flow chart of distros?
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that thing.
Those are great. So on one hand, we would look at that and say, this is amazing. This is a sign that open source is flourishing. On the other hand, do we have too many? And I suppose to ask this more precisely, do we really need 4 Red Hat downstreams?
So, I mean, it's the question that everybody's asking, right? Like, why do I need all of these? And I think I kind of alluded to it at the beginning. Yeah, there are 4 like big ones right now that everybody's kind of looking at, but there are a number of other ones that have been around Scientific Linux is one of my favorite examples. Right. Scientific Linux was around forever. They stopped producing Scientific Linux only 2 years ago when CentOS died, because they were a downstream rebuild of CentOS. So the number of what we would call Red Hat clones historically has been higher than most people are paying attention to.
Right.
Enterprise Linux has not been exciting or sexy or interesting for a very long time, but now it is for some reason. Can't imagine why.
Because there's drama around it.
Exactly.
So I kind of made the observation back when AlmaLinux and Rocky Linux were first kind of born into the world. Those two projects take a different I don't know about a different view of the world, but the 2 projects are set up differently. One is very much community oriented, and the other sort of has the benevolent dictator approach to the world.
Yeah, the thing I always say is that we're solving the problem that we saw with CentOS in different ways.
Yes, and I made the observation then that it's probably a good thing that both of them exist, because there's going to be challenges, and those 2 groups, and of course there's more than just 2, but talking about those 2 in particular, will approach those challenges in different ways. And so you have a better chance of this thing that we all love surviving when you have these different approaches happening at the same time. And it's interesting to me that we've seen that play out, where Rocky Linux has kind of dug their heels in and said, no, we are going to be a bug for bug compatible Red Hat respin. And AlmaLinux has moved into this area of, we're going to be a compatible Red Hat respin. We're going to base on CentOS Stream. And this is really interesting that we have these 2 different lines of thinking. I love this because we had a pretty severe security vulnerability back a few months ago in ZenBleed. And Red Hat just kind of yawned and said, yeah, we'll probably fix that the next time we do a minor rev. And the AlmaLinux folks were like, here's a test, but just a few days afterwards, here's a test patch you can install. Go try it. And I looked at ZenBleed. I said, this is a big deal. We really need to get this fixed. So I felt pretty good about myself about having AlmaLinux installs when that happened, because I could go out and get that fixed pretty quick. That was pretty nice.
Yeah, and that's the freedom that being compatible has allowed us. Mm-hmm. We get to more immediately and more directly meet the needs of our community. I'll put it that way.
Right.
Like, somebody came in, we do have a lot of web hosting providers that use us, but they're not the only ones by far. But they're the ones that were like, hey, we have this problem, and Zen is basically publicly available on all of our servers, so help.
Yes.
And so we did, right? That's the power of what we're doing.
Yeah. I think that's great. Is AlmaLinux still able to have pretty friendly relations with upstream Red Hat? Is there kind of a back channel there to talk to those guys?
So, here's the deal. We are all in the same... We've all been in the same community for a number of years. Mm-hmm. So we absolutely talk to them all the time. Like, we have interactions with them.
Sure.
We don't have we don't have active business conversations. Like, Red Hat's not coming to us with what they're doing for approval or discussion. They're going to do what they want to do, and that's okay. Linux and the open source community will continue to adapt the way that it always has. That's, you mentioned earlier, like, do we really need more Linuxes?
Right.
And the reality is, the reason this happens is because somebody said, I have this need, and then they go and fix it. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of open source.
Yep. So, Benny, do you mind if I ask about the B in Benny? I meant to ask this at the beginning. I meant to ask this at the beginning of the episode, and I forgot until just now. Every time I've seen your name written out, your first name is not capitalized.
That's correct.
Is that just for fun?
So early in my career in web hosting, I read this book. I was doing what we at the time called evangelism, and I hate that title now. It was essentially community outreach, right? And I read this book by this guy named Seth Godin, and it's called Tribes, and then there was another one called something about a purple cow or something. I don't remember. But it was really heavy on the branding,
right,
and like the personal branding, and don't forget that you are a brand that you need to sell too. Mm-hmm. And I, around the same time, decided I hated capital B's on my name. I just don't like the way they look. So I stopped capitalizing the B, and I mean it's more than 20 years now that I've been doing that, and so now people ask me, and I'm like, because capital B's are ugly.
I love it.
They're kind of aggressive at the beginning of
right.
I kind of get it. Yeah,
they're extremely aggressive. I've tried so many different fonts, and because it is such a point of conversation, I've considered going back, but like they're all just ugly, so I don't do it.
You would be diluting your brand now to go back and change it.
Exactly.
That's great.
All right.
Sorry, I'm thinking about fonts, and that's a whole other design conversation.
A whole other podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, I could go down so many rabbit holes, but I'll stop.
Kathrine, did you want to ask about non-code contributions? Yeah. Let's go into that.
So I noticed, again, offline in an email, we were talking, or you mentioned, the types of contribution, and there's So, okay, I'm going to back up just a tiny bit. A lot of us, and I'm just going to lay it all out there because I have no problem doing so, and I do all the time, but women in technology tend to have some baggage, and it's not, obviously universal, but I'll just, from my own perspective, I carry a lot of baggage with me, and I notice a lot of other women do, too. And we tend to kind of put pressure on ourselves, especially in open source communities where we are few in number, or we have traditionally been, although that's improving a bit, I've noticed.
Yes.
we have a little bit of baggage, though, about what counts as a contribution. And for me personally, and I've told this story many times, I never really felt like I contributed anything until I actually was contributing code. Like, I got a merged pull request. This is like mad. And then I got more and more and more. And then I felt like I was real. And that's ridiculous, because that's like, again, this is my own personal baggage. And now, again, as I've gotten older and been more involved in other organizations and other types of work, and there is an amazing, again, like we went over from the beginning, there's an amazing amount of work that goes into producing a Linux distribution that has nothing to do with a pull request. Yep. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, about what types of how you make non-code contributors feel valued. How about that for starters?
Ooh,
that's a really hard one, and I think a good one.
Yeah, especially so. As I started, so let's back up a little bit. Mm-hmm. One of the last conferences that I ran for a company called cPanel, I set up this thing. It was an idea that was born out of many conversations with many different people, but I set it up as we called it Open Source Alley, and essentially on the conference floor where all the booths were, there was a line of booths that we gifted to all of the open source projects that cPanel was built on top of. So we invited like Exum and MySQL and cPanel and not cPanel, I'm sorry, CentOS, and just a bunch of different things that were integral to what was happening with cPanel, and set up, booths where people could talk to the developers. We paid for the developers to come in. We, if they needed money for stickers and that kind of stuff, we bought them stickers so that they can hand them out and that kind of stuff. And it was a really long time before I was able to see that as contributing to open source, because I certainly wasn't committing code. I wasn't doing anything that was active to like improve their web presence or like anything like that. But that was a contribution to those projects, because it was a way for them to interact with their users in a way that they would not have been able to otherwise. And it was a way to improve the reach of those projects, right? Mm-hmm. And it's that kind of stuff that we don't. It was a very long time. Actually, I started working for Sarah Novotny who was huge in the Kubernetes community, and I started working for her at Microsoft. And she was the one that pointed out to me that was contributing to open source. I was like, well, I wasn't really contributing anything. It's just, no, the effort is the contribution. And that's the thing that I have been preaching since I started with Alma, is the effort is the contribution, because my pull requests are all HTML and CSS for the website at this point. Like, I'm not contributing what people would consider, like normal developers consider code. Right. But I am working. At this point, I get to do this full time. I'm sponsored to do Alma work full time. And that means I'm working 40 to 50 hours a week on Alma stuff and not contributing a line of code that isn't related to the website. And understanding, since I'm the one that does that at the top, it makes it a lot easier for me to get kind of aggressive with people who are contributing to the website or contributing translations or contributing just by interacting with us on social media or helping out on the forums or anything like that. Those people are so integral to the success of what we're doing. When I say aggressive, I'm very, no, you are doing this. You are helping, and I need you to recognize it.
Yeah.
Because it's hard.
Yeah. So oh goodness, there's a bunch of different directions I kind of want to go with this all at once. The little squirrel in my brain is just running laps. I think we would all agree that contributing code and contributing documentation are like this. It's not the same, and you've got to have both. Well, I mean, I guess you can have a project that's just people contributing code, but then nobody knows how to use it.
Yeah.
If you just have a project where people are contributing documentation, you're not really going anywhere. But I'm involved in a project right now where I'm one of the developers. I'm not very good at writing documentation. I will admit this now. It's not my strong point. I can do it, but it's not. I would prefer to be in there with the C++ and just write the code. Mm-hmm. We have some people that are they document. That is their thing. They really don't write any code, but they document. And my word, is that amazing to have in a project. So yeah. I very much feel that idea that you've got to have both sides to it. And I think that's really valuable for a project to come to the point to where they kind of understand that. It's a healthier project, I think.
And it's always a topic at basically any open source event you go to. It is, how do I get people to care about my project? Mm-hmm. Like somebody's asking, well, I wrote this cool thing. How do I make people come be part of it? And the answer is always, you wrote the code and that's cool. But there's a million, you're starting to recognize that just open sourcing code is not going to make an open source project successful.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
And we always fall back to documentation as the example of a non-code contribution, but there's so much more than that too, right? True. Mm-hmm. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, we sometimes need lawyers.
Right.
we need people. We need people with marketing expertise and expert communicators to get people excited about projects. We need community wranglers. We need. There's so much that goes into making something successful.
I mean, even baseline. We don't have a graphic designer. So all the graphics you're seeing are me, and I am not a graphic designer. I'm doing the best I can, and we've got a couple of people that are closer to actual graphic designers who will contribute once in a while, but they're all volunteers, so it's not like I can be like, hey, this blog post has to go out in 6 hours. Can you make me a header?
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a different angle to this I want to ask you about, and I want to feel you out and get your opinion on it.
Okay.
There's a concept that I've heard kicked around for a while. It's Purnell's iron law of bureaucracy. And it goes this way. It says, in any bureaucracy, the people devoted to the benefit of the bureaucracy itself always inevitably get in control, and those dedicated to the goals that the bureaucracy is supposed to accomplish have less and less influence. And so it's sort of the other side of, if we were to talk about the directions an open source project can get off course, in my mind, you've got one direction where it gets so dedicated to maybe a vendor that needs to make something happen, so it can veer off one way. And I wonder if there's not a possibility, and particularly as you get into older open source projects, where a project will veer off sort of under the weight of its own bureaucratic structure. I don't know that that's ever anything that's happened before with open source. But when you talk about a big project like Alma, is that something that is kind of in the back of your mind too?
It's funny because the bureaucracy at Alma is mostly just the board, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have a massive structure. We have a fair number of SIGs, but the SIGs are all, if you look at who's in them, we're kind of all in all of them.
Right.
We've got probably 25 people that are doing the work, and mostly the board is there for general advising and fiscal responsibility, but not for driving the project. And that's the thing that I'm seeing at Alma is the people who are most invested in the ideals of the project are the ones that are really pushing it forward. It's not the board leading it as much as I would love to see my board members more active. They are nearly entirely advisory. So I don't think that's a thing that we're gonna have. Now you're making me think about my bylaws, right? Now you're making me think about how things are set up. Again, be cynical. How could this potentially be abused? But I don't think that's a thing we have to worry about, at least now at AlmaLinux.
Yeah. So I know for a while the whole idea of adding code of conducts to projects was kind of controversial, and really it boiled down to the fear that those code of conducts were going to be used as a tool to bully people, right? That's the thing that it was intended to prevent, and there was this fear that it was going to be used as a tool for that in and of itself. And I don't think we've seen a lot of that. Now, I did go looking just the other day for an unrelated reason, and I found a couple of instances where that did seem to be the case. But overwhelmingly, it's not. And I think a big part of that is because you have the people that are at the top of the project. They're actually the ones that are involved, and they don't want to push their contributors away. We, as open source projects, we tend to be more interested in getting good code, in getting good documentation, in getting, the different things that people can help with, as opposed to playing political games. And so that's always been, it's kind of one of the things that has made open source work, is because we just, I guess we could use the term meritocracy here. We care about the things that work more than any of the other things.
Yeah, for sure. The other side of it, I've certainly seen code of conducts weaponized, but I think as we all get better at writing code of conducts, we're getting ourselves into positions where it's harder to weaponize a code of conduct like that, because some of the communities that I've been in the past have had massive user bases that, get mad about something, and half the people leave and the other half stay around to troll. And when you're in a situation with a weak code of conduct, the people who have been around forever know exactly how much they control, they know who they control, and they know how much they can push. And it's really frustrating to be in that kind of situation, because we all know what gaslighting is. We all know what you're pulling right now. But because you're only kind of violating, I can't really say this is the rule.
Right.
And the solution to that situation is just make a better code of conduct.
Sure.
It's give yourself the out that is, if you are causing a disruption, you get to get kicked out. 9 times out of 10, the organizers are not the ones violating, or not the ones abusing the code of conduct.
And the other thing with that, and I have to give props to the OSI for this, because they have absolutely stuck to the open source definition, and that's super important. One of the reasons that's so important is because that means that if something bureaucratic, whether it's code of conduct or what have you, gets weaponized too much at a project, everybody that's sick of it can just go fork it and start another project. And the open source definition guarantees that they have the right to do that. And so I think that's something that's super important. So, different direction. I want to ask about who all is using AlmaLinux. And one of the names that comes to mind is CERN. Is AlmaLinux being used by CERN? Is AlmaLinux going to be used to open a black hole that's going to rip the Earth apart when they turn the...
They get so mad when you make that joke. Because it's obviously it is a joke, and it's funny from my perspective, because now, especially now having been there, they have explained how using science, that's not possible, and it's not going to be a thing that happens. Right. But when it was first, it was first a thing that started coming out against them, they spent so much time correcting people, both just on Twitter, but also in the media, that they're just over it. I don't want that joke anymore. Okay, sorry. But, so... we are not being used on the collider itself. Okay. Which is kind of a bummer, although I did get to see it, and it was insane.
Oh, sure.
We went to visit on site almost a year ago, and it just happened that they were offline that week. The collider was offline that week, and that meant that we got to actually get on and see it, and it's nuts, and we've got pictures on the website and that kind of stuff. But yes, CERN is using us for a lot of their everyday stuff, in addition to their data processing and that kind of stuff. We've got all kinds of companies that are using us. One of the biggest surprises for me was Zoom. Mm-hmm. Zoom is using us. Verizon is using us. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of people in Asia, a bunch of companies that I don't recognize, and therefore I don't know where they are in a hierarchy or how big they are, but they're using a lot of Linux servers. We've got, the number of threads on Reddit that are, my home lab is set up with AlmaLinux and I'm doing this thing and I don't know how to do this thing. That's popping up all the time.
Yeah.
We're all over the place, and I think that it is honestly a testament to what Enterprise Linux has become. That they don't come to us. They're not like, hey, I'm using your stuff and you need to be excited about it. They're just like, oh, this is a stable thing that we can use and we're going to go use it. And that's awesome. I intentionally don't pull a bunch of information about the people and the ways that people are using AlmaLinux because I don't need that information, right? And I don't want to be responsible for it.
Sure.
So it's really just like, who do I see using it? Who mentions it? Like Cisco apparently is using AlmaLinux as the base for their new OS because they were using CentOS before and now they're using us. And I found that out on Reddit. Like, they don't come to us, they just start using it. And to me, that's exciting because that is a testament to them not needing reassurance. They don't need to come talk to the board and say, well, are you going to be around though? Or are you doing a good job? They just see what we're doing as valuable. And it's really exciting.
Yeah. Kathrine, did you want to get any last questions in?
Yeah,
We're getting close to the bottom of the hour.
Well, I feel like, trite as it may be, it being January 3rd today, I feel like I have to kind of, I'm curious, like, what's exciting? We're in a new year. What's going to happen in 2024? And what are you most excited about? Both, honestly, both within the AlmaLinux community and also maybe peripherally.
Yeah, so 2024 for us is going to be a lot of, honestly, the number of people that have come to us in the last 3 months and said, okay, so we're finally dealing with this CentOS 7 going end of life thing. What are you guys doing? How do we migrate? So there's going to be a lot of helping people migrate off of CentOS 7. There's going to be a lot of, we just had our first AlmaLinux day in Japan, and we've got 2 more planned, one in Germany and one somewhere in the, how do I say this, the U.S. time zones. It'll either be North or South America. I haven't figured out where we're going to line it up yet, but so there's going to be a lot more outreach, a lot more conferences. We're going to set up a couple of additional ways for people to engage and to contribute. Like we were talking about, one of the big ones is staffing events. So that's always hard, right? Yeah. Is finding people who are able to dedicate the time to, attending and standing at a booth all day. It's just that kind of stuff. Continue to answer the questions that our people have, provide the solutions that they need, and support our community however they want to be supported. The amount of work is very, very big, and we're bringing actually all of our leaders together right next to FOSDEM. We're setting up last year we had an AlmaLinux Leaders Day summit sort of thing, and we're doing the same thing again this year because there is a bunch to do and we want to get it all lined up. Yeah,
that's very cool. So we do actually have a live audience. We occasionally get questions, and we just got a question. Username Mashed Potato asks, he's great. He's been around forever. Does AlmaLinux provide support like Red Hat? Otherwise, how are they profitable?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It is.
So
money question.
We're not profitable. We are a nonprofit. All of our funding comes through sponsors and backers in a variety of different ways. So we've got 25 businesses, like companies, who are backing us in a number of either of hardware, like build resources, or they're giving us people who get paid to work on the project full time, or they're giving us cash, which is always very, very nice.
Yes.
And that's how we do all of the things we do. It's if you want support for AlmaLinux, it is an open source project, and that means you can go to any number of support providers that do it. Cloud Linux obviously does it. There's a company in Japan called CyberTrust Japan. They provide commercial support, and there's another company called OpenLogic. They've all come to us and said, we're doing this. Can we put a logo on your website? So they do. And that's really, from my perspective, freeing. Like, my job isn't to go find customers. My job is to help find ways for companies and people who are invested in the future of AlmaLinux to contribute to the future of AlmaLinux. And that means that it's not just selling. It's almost never selling. It's just, what can you provide and where can we make it fit? Mm-hmm. One of our newest sponsors is a company called IP Info, and they are helping us improve our mirror system. Mm. They provide information about geolocation for IP addresses, and we use that to decide where we should be routing download requests. And that's the kind of thing that we're getting, the kind of support that we're getting that makes everything work better for our community.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that you try to keep your nose, as it were, out of the details of who all is using AlmaLinux, and I'm going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of how many users there are of AlmaLinux around the world, like download numbers or anything?
So I can tell you what I can, excuse me. What I can tell you is the number of servers that are downloading updates weekly.
Sure.
Because, again, we're not really deep into it. It is a setting that is like an optional setting you have to enable, mm-hmm. called, what is it called? How am I forgetting this? I'm just going to blank on this name right now.
It's some sort of automatic updates.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's the updates, but Count Me. It's called Count Me.
Aha.
And you have to enable it on the server, and the server will then show up as part of the Count Me data.
Okay.
When we pull it every week. And as of last week, we were pulling 700,000 servers were pulling updates from AlmaLinux, or from our mirror systems. Uh-huh. If the company or person didn't enable Count Me, or they have their own mirror, so they're not pulling updates from our mirror system, then we won't see them, and we have no idea how many there are. It's a number that to me is insane, because we started the year with about 300,000 servers.
Oh, wow.
So we've more than doubled since the beginning of the year. And it's been the last 100,000 would be the last 100,000 came from between October and early December. Like, there's it's growing quick.
Yeah. So I have been using Red Hat derivatives for over 10 years now. I have been using AlmaLinux pretty much since it's been around, and I didn't know that Count Me existed. So you have a very small percentage, I am sure, of your user base that actually has that turned on.
I am certain.
So somewhere way south of 10%, I am sure.
Yeah. And that's also exciting, right? Like,
yes.
I don't like to extrapolate and assume, because I feel like that's disingenuous.
Sure.
But I could say, like, this is an optional setting. You have to enable it, and this is the number that we're getting. And that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Now I do like to ask this question of all of our guests, and I'll put it this way for you. Where is the weirdest or most surprising thing that you've seen? The most surprising place that you've seen AlmaLinux pop up? Where has it caught you off guard the most?
Ooh, weirdest or most surprising place I've seen it pop up.
I don't know. It makes you think. It's a tough one.
No, yeah, I was on a plane. I was coming back from Japan in May, and I was on a plane, and I was wearing my AlmaLinux hoodie. And this guy came in and sat down next to me, and, you're doing all this stuff to get ready for takeoff. And he turns and he looks at me, and he looks at my hoodie, and he's like, AlmaLinux? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, how do you... I use it on my laptop. And I was like, what? And he pulls out his laptop, and it's got AlmaLinux running on it.
Nice.
And
awesome.
We geek about that for a second. And then my husband, who is incredibly supportive and also kind of cheeky, says she's not saying it, but she's the chair. And he's like, oh no, I knew that. It's fine. That's weird.
Figured it out.
That's a little funny.
Yeah,
Wow.
but it was. I mean, that to me was the most.
That's
How do
cool
I say
though.
this? Yeah, it was really cool.
That's
It's
neat
really
to
like
get seen,
yeah,
get recognized.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
So what's funny is I tend to ask a very similar question, except I ask it differently. It's funny, we all have the same, our little tool bag, right?
Yeah.
I always ask it as like, what are the most surprising uses? Like, is anybody using it in a way that you would not have ever expected or intended? And that was I don't know about a Linux distribution, but some other projects can come up with some very interesting answers there.
Yeah, I think
something
Linux is so pervasive at this point.
Yeah.
And if you've been around the industry at all, then you're not surprised about where they're using it anymore.
Yeah,
that Linux is everywhere.
The old joke about running it on your toaster is kind of a real thing these days.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
All right. It has been a blast to get to talk with you, Benny. There are 2 questions that we have to ask you, or we get emails about them if we don't ask these 2 questions.
Well, then let's do it.
And let's do it. What's your favorite scripting language and text editor?
Ooh, these are easy.
Oh, good.
So we've talked a little bit about how I'm not really a coder, but I did get my start as a sysadmin, so I know Bash very well.
Sure.
So I can bash my way out of almost anything.
There you go.
And then text editor. So if I'm doing command line stuff, it's going to be Vim.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm doing like managing stuff on my computer and pushing to a repo or something, then I use TextMate.
Oh, okay.
Because I installed it a million years ago, and it is just like I think I bought it in like a year after they released the first one, and it has been stable and perfect for me the whole time because I don't do anything super complicated, so it's nice.
When you say you don't write a lot of code, my fear is always that someone's going to tell, and we've had this happen a time or two, that their favorite text editor is Microsoft Word. It's like, maybe you're on the wrong show. All right. So again, thank you so very much for being here. It has been a real pleasure to get to talk to you, and I don't know, maybe before too long we'll have to have you back and talk about some of the things that happened in 2024 with AlmaLinux.
I love it.
Yep.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Thanks.
All right. What do you think, Kathrine?
That was great. I learned some new stuff. I had a good time. That is a good show for me, from my end. I hope it's good for the people listening.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's something that's going to be a real value to folks to be able to talk about some of these issues. Talk about the difference between, your alternatives. If you're on CentOS 7, there are different places that you can go to. We didn't talk about Elevate. There is already this script out there that helps people migrate from CentOS 7. And one of the fun things,
the next show.
we probably need to talk about that at some point. One of the cool things about Elevate is that you can tell it, I want to go to Rocky, or you can tell it, I want to go to AlmaLinux. And both of those are just the people that maintain it. They have both of those in there, and I think that's really cool. Cool. Lots of fodder when we have her back or talk with somebody else about AlmaLinux and that entire ecosystem. All right. Well, next week we are having a very old friend of the show back. Next week we're interviewing Randall Schwartz, essentially the godfather of FLOSS Weekly. Something to keep in mind, because of his schedule, we are going to be interviewing him on a Tuesday. Now, I don't know yet whether we're going to delay the release of the show until Wednesday, but the live recording will be on Tuesday. Same time, same place. And then for that episode, Aaron Newcomb will actually be back. Again, same deal. He's got a scheduled conflict on Wednesdays. So when it lined up on Tuesday, I said, hey, let's bring both of our 2 guys in that have that conflict. So that is next week. Kathrine, do you have anything you want to plug before we go?
Let's see. Sure. Yeah. Sorry, I'm like a holiday brain.
Yes.
What do I do?
You do things
on vacation. Yeah. So, if you want to hear more of my open source pontification, and except it's not really about me. If you want to hear from very interesting and smart people,
yes.
I am involved in a couple other podcasts. One of them is Open at Intel, and you can find that on podcast players everywhere. And also, as you mentioned, I think earlier, Doc Searles and I still do Reality 2.0.
Yep. Excellent. All right. So if you've made it this far, I do want to let you know we do record this live. So there is the Hackaday Discord, and we've got a link in the show notes, and I will try to make sure that it ends up in the Hackaday article too about this show. And that link will take you to the event. It includes an invite to the Discord server. Come join us live. Ask questions live. We love taking questions from the live audience because you folks out there live, you think of things that we don't think of at the time, and it is really nice. And then, is there a project or guest that you want to see on FLOSS Weekly? You get a hold of them and tell them and have them send us an email, floss@hackaday.com. We have that set up now and working. Have your guests send us an email, floss@hackaday.com, and we will schedule them. We'll book them, and we will talk to them. And then one other thing that I want to plug before we go, I do have the other podcast. That's the Untitled Linux Show. If you want to hear me and my co-hosts over there talking all about Linux and the news and the things that you need to know about, that is over at Twitland, but it's part of Club Twit. We just did our end of the year episode from 2023 to 2024. We made that one public. Everybody can get to it if you want to go get a teaser. And if you want to get more of ULS, that is over in Club Twit. I think that is it for today. It's been a great show. Thank you everyone for listening, those live and on the download. And hey, we will see you next week on FLOSS Weekly.